Hello everyone, this is José María Martín-Olalla speaking. I am professor of physics at the University of Seville in Spain. I'm here to describe what some chronobiologists are missing or ignoring about daylight saving time, DST. I will be featuring the manuscript Traffic Accident Increase Attributed to Daylight Saving Time Double After the Energy Policy Act, published in Current Biology on April 6, 2020. The paper is a correspondence addressed to a report published on January 30 by Fritz, Wright, and Vetter, entitled A Chronobiological Evaluation of the Acute Effects of DST on Traffic Accident Risk, where acute means in the short range of 1 week. The authors compare the number of accidents in a transition week against a normal week of the year. It is kind of a popular analysis in these times where an everyday life property is tested against DST weeks. These analyses are aimed to improve our understanding of potential hazardous effects of DST transitions. You can find similar reports on self-killing rates, stock exchange values, autopsy rates, domestic accidents, or myocardial infarction. DST is composed of 3 legs. First, it is size. Not much to say about that. The only practical way of changing clocks by the stroke of 1 hour. That leads to circadian misalignment, an alteration in the phase of human cycles like the sleep-wake cycle. This is a clear concern for the circadian community. Then it comes direction. Change can go forward or backward, advance or delay. Forward change leads to sleep deprivation, a second major concern in the circadian community. Point is, we easily get up earlier after a forward change, since alarm clocks ring 1 hour earlier after DST onset. But at night, alarms do not send us to bed, and sleep onset time is less prone to get advanced. These 2 legs are thoroughly addressed by chronobiologists and physiologists as they summarize their concerns on the practice. However, by alone, they do not fully describe the purpose of DST. They do describe what would happen at the equator, where every single day of the year is pretty similar to each other. In a flash, circadian misalignment and sleep deprivation are the disadvantages of DST practice. They must be balanced to the advantages, which are ignored or missed by chronobiologists. The third leg is the timing of the practice, the oblivion of the circadian community. Not saying they do not know when transitions happen, only they do not usually stress its role. They do not draw conclusions from the timing. Timing is related to latitude and to seasons and leads to a catchphrase. Spring forward, fall back. Point is, not the other way around. Point is, not even summer forward and winter back, or any other combination. The catchphrase is just telling us that DST practice is aimed to a purpose. The forthcoming analysis will focus on the spring transition, saying it is the transition that leads to sleep deprivation. 1 year ago, I posted a video dissertation in YouTube explaining the role of latitude in DST mechanism. Here I will again put forward a key question, which is the best timing of the day for the starting point of human activity, say for waking up or for start laboring. An educated guess, a first approach, is the latest sunrise time of the year, so that you pretty much get sure that your activity will come in daylight year-round. At 40 degrees latitude north, the latitude of Madrid and New York City, this comes as 7:22 mean solar time, some 4 hours and a half before noon. Now here you can see the evolution of solar altitude as a function of calendar date at this time of the day. Also the evolution of solar altitude at noon. Positive solar altitude means the sun is above the horizon and there is daylight. Negative solar altitude means the sun is below the horizon and there is dark. It is all fine in winter to start your activity as you see the sun rising. But in June, at this very hour 7:22, the sun hits 30 degrees above the horizon, and it becomes weird to start doing things by then. The sun rose some 3 hours ago. Worse, later on, at noon, you will be subjected to a significant insolation whose efficiency amounts to 95%. It is a tropical, hazardous insolation. Starting at this time of the day in June may not be the wisest of the decisions. Indeed, people with propensity to morningness, lark people, will not be very happy here. They could be less uncomfortable at the preceding hour, 6:22 mean solar time, but of course, this timing is not that fine in winter. The sun would be well below the horizon, and people with propensity to eveningness, old people, would not be very happy here. In the past, we can think of kind of a smooth seasonal adaptation that advances the phase of human cycle as the sun rises and delays it back as the sun falls. But currently this is impractical. Opening times cannot be referred to sunrise that way. We are synchronized by clocks. We could just alter the opening times through seasons from 7:22 to 6:22. Daylight saving time is aimed to this purpose, only that the preceding hour is still named 7:22, but now it is now 7:22 daylight saving time and not 6:22 anymore. Either way, the mechanism alters the phase of human cycles and leads to sleep deprivation. But think of the mechanism as a compromise where lark people and the old people are less unhappy at the extreme seasons, winter and summer. A compromise that prevents people from being exposed to damaging insolation in summer and prevents people from being exposed to the dark of the dawn in winter. These are the advantages which are ignored by chronobiologists. They depend on latitude. The timing of the transition is relevant. You must wait until the sun rose enough to switch time forward, and you must switch it back before the sun gets too low. You must always keep your activity in the daylight period. That is why it would be meaningless to do transitions in January and July. Timing and latitude also address a common misunderstanding within the circadian community. The DST spring transition is not comparable when traveling to different time zones from Chicago to New York City as an example, switching from Central Time to Eastern Time. They mean DST onset is worse than an everyday practice to which they agree. We can adapt readily. Their point is when you travel eastward you will start doing things earlier, and the sun will start doing things earlier too. It will rise 1 hour earlier so that people will keep in phase with ambient light. On the contrary, after DST onset, human activity is advanced while sunrise stands still. But it is not the case. The sun does not always stand still. The argument would be valid at the equator. The sun does stand still here, and every single day is similar to each other. It would be valid if forward transition came in January. You would have to wait until the sun rises. But by the end of March, beginning of April, the argument just fails, because after the transition you will start doing things in daylight, and it is of less importance whether the sun rose 1 hour and a half ago or just half an hour ago, as long as there is daylight. Let's now dive in the report. The authors analyzed a record of 500,000 fatal motor vehicle accidents, MVAs, in the United States. The record is averaged every week of the year, and the average is split in two periods, from 1996 to 2006 and from 2007 to 2017. While these two periods, in 2007 the Energy Policy Act altered the timing of the transition from early April to the middle of March, a 3-week advance. So here we have the transition week, and 1, 2, 3 weeks earlier it comes transition week after 2007. The picture also shows the standard deviation, the signal noise. Focusing on a given week of the year, the 11 observations will scatter like this, from a low to a high value. The fluctuation, the noise, is some 15%, a number which will be relevant soon. It describes the impact of weather condition, road condition, and the like from year to year. This really exhaustive table of results allows a clear understanding of what authors did well and did not so well in analyzing MVAs. We have the observation period, the relevant weeks, the times of the day, and the results, the incidence rate ratio and the 95% confidence interval, which are also shown in a picture. Hitting a value 1 means that your tested week is not different from any other week of the year. Its delta equals to 0. Hitting 0.9 means the tested week gets a bias. MVAs are decreasing. The amount of the decrease is minus 10%. Hitting 1.10 leads to positive bias. MVAs are increasing for the tested week. The increase amounts to 10%. The probabilistic value aims to understand the relevance of the 95 confidence interval, which is shown by whiskers in the peak. Think that this experiment could be repeated many times, resulting in many different observations. Now you can't do that because this is a natural experiment, but think of doing that. 95% of these many different observations would lie within the confidence interval, within the whiskers. Now if the confidence interval, if the whiskers hit 1, then bias would change from positive to negative among these many repeated observations. Sometimes MVAs increase, sometimes decrease. We say the bias is not statistically relevant for the standard level of significance of a 5%. On the contrary, if the whiskers do not hit 1, then the bias won't be altered, almost never. Therefore, the bias is statistically relevant. Finally, signal noise can also show up on this picture. It compares the significance of our observation against the myriad of things that have impact in MVAs, and that cause its fluctuation or noise. Results, generally speaking, are lower than signal noise. The authors draw their highlights from the full observation period. Spring DST transition acutely increases fatal accident risk by a 6% in the United States. Here it comes the 6. And spring DST transition risk is highest in the morning, not in the afternoon. Here we have the morning results and the afternoon results. Morning results are highest. I will be now challenging these two highlights. Let's first remove controls, no point in discussing them. Then let's focus on the whole observation period. It is an average. Since size and direction did not change before 2006 and after 2007, the authors, perhaps without noticing, are just averaging the impact of transition dates. But this is misleading, since the spring DST onset has never occurred 1.5 weeks before the first Sunday of April. They occurred either in April or in March. We can safely remove this average and pay attention to what did happen before and after the Energy Policy Act. Finally, I will also remove the whole day observation. It is again an average, and we can also pay attention to morning and afternoon results. Indeed, DST transition has a direction which focuses on morning human activity only. Therefore, it is sensitive to analyze morning and afternoon results separately. Now things are crystal clear. There are only 4 independent observations, and 3 of them get similar scores. We can describe these scores by 3 facts. Morning and afternoon results before 2007 are quite similar. This clashes with the second highlight. The DST did not impact the highest in the morning before 2006. Instead, it impacted evenly. Second, the statistical significance of this observation is not that great. The lower confidence interval bound almost hit 1. Third, the observed value is 1/3 of signal noise. meaning that the overall significance is not great either. There exists a myriad of things having a greater impact on MVAs than DST spring transitions, just weather conditions, rod condition, and the like. Which is the mechanism behind these facts? We will see later. First, let's have a look to the remaining result. Mornings after 2007 are really different, specifically if compared to morning before 2006. There are again three facts to be highlighted. First, delta, the deviation, just doubled after 2007, from 6 to 13. It is a remarkable change. Second, the lower confidence interval bound is now statistically significant. Indeed, it is very significant. Third, delta is now as large as signal noise. Morning results after 2007 are quite a thing within fatal motor vehicle accidents. Question is, which is the mechanism behind? Of course, it is Section 110 of the Energy Policy Act, the timing of the transition. At the beginning of the DST practice, transition came by the end of April. After the transition, illumination conditions remained unaltered. The sun hit 14 degrees above the horizon even after the transition. From 1987 on, the transition week was set on early April, still enough to keep illumination conditions unaltered. But with DST onset at the middle of March, many people returned to a situation where illumination conditions are far less gentle after the transition. To be more specific, the Energy Policy Act transferred a high volume of traffic into the twilight when conditions are prone to more traffic accidents. That is the point ignored by the authors, and to some extent this comes from the way in which the circadian community addresses DST practice, paying little attention to the role of seasons, latitude, and timing. Therefore, a sensitive conclusion is Section 110 of the Energy Policy Act should be removed and a spring transition week be placed on early April or late March. That would decrease accident risk associated to the spring transition. Now let's get back to the other three results. Which is the mechanism behind them? Since only now we know there is no change in illumination conditions, we can link them to sleep deprivation and circadian misalignment. It is them that likely have an impact on traffic accident risk in the United States. Nonetheless, this impact is slight, and therefore there is still no evidence that supports a clear claim for abolishing DST, a preference of authors and a preference of the circadian community. In other words, there is no smoking gun here. Finally, I will refer to the third highlight. 28 fatal accidents could be prevented yearly if the transition was abolished. It is a popular thing within the circadian community to link DST spring transition to risks and eventually to deaths. Now this number, 28, blends contribution from sleep deprivation and from poor illumination conditions. Either of them can be addressed without abolishing DST. I have just shown that the impact of poor illumination can be removed with a correct choice of timing. That will shrink this number to some 18 to 20 fatal motor vehicle accidents if the impact of 5% would still apply after 2007. Illumination condition is also an issue in the fall transition, and advancing it to the end of September would also prevent some loss of lives through fatal motor vehicle accidents. On the other hand, the impact of sleep deprivation can also be addressed, putting forward a subtle idea. Transition dates are predictable, and we can pre-adapt to them. We know DST week is coming by the middle of March, the end of March, or the beginning of April, whichever your layout is. In every case, we can make sensitive decisions to ease the impact of sleep deprivation and circadian misalignment. For instance, we could advance by 15 minutes an alarm clock every of the 3 weeks prior to DST spring transition. You will be switching from a 1 stroke of 1 hour to 4 strokes of 15 minutes each, easing misalignment and easing sleep deprivation. We may encourage people to behave like that. Yet, it will be hardly the case that this pre-adaptation becomes popular. Truth is that almost nobody behaves like that, even though we could be doing that. This fact is showing that the learning experience of 100 years of continued DST practice has led to a common knowledge. DST poses little risk. It is fine to improve our understanding of the impact of DST transition in the circadian system on everyday life issues, but it is unlikely that a smoking gun signaling DST is hazardous will show up. Indeed, results by Fritz, Boffin, Wright, and Vetter are just supporting this idea. Sleep deprivation and circadian misalignment have a weak impact on fatal motor vehicle accidents in the United States. At the end, I would like to thank Professor Juan del Álamo from the University of Washington and Professor Manuel García Villalba from Universidad Carlos III for alerting me to the commented paper. I would also like to thank Professor Jorge Mira from Universidade de Santiago de Compostela for a critical reading of the manuscript and a critical watching of this video. This dissertation is based on manuscript published in peer-reviewed journals. Please have a visit to my archive. A master file of this screencast will be available at ResearchGate. A Spanish version will also be available. Thank you very much for your kind attention.